March 17, 1944. 2300 hours, Royal Air Force Wittering, Northamptonshire, England. Captain James Tex Harlan stood in the dispersal hut, staring at an empty oil can with an intensity that suggested he was solving a complex equation. Outside, the night sky over England was filling with the distant rumble of Lancaster bombers returning from Hamburg. And somewhere in that darkness, German night fighters were hunting them. The telephone on the operations desk rang with the sharp urgency that meant trouble. Flight Lieutenant Peter Caldwell grabbed it, listened for 10 seconds, then looked at Harlan with an expression that combined desperation and hope in equal measure. "Jerry's waiting for them over the channel. At least 6 Junkers 88s confirmed. Our night fighters are 30 miles south. Wrong position entirely. The Lancasters are sitting ducks." He paused, checking his watch. "First bombers will reach the coast in 14 minutes. They'll be slaughtered." Harlan continued staring at the oil can. It was a standard quart container that had held lubricating oil for the Merlin engines. Empty. Battered. Absolutely ordinary. Except in Harlan's mind, it had just become the most important piece of equipment at RAF Wittering. "Get me 6 more of these," he said quietly, holding up the can. "And a crew chief who's willing to think I've lost my mind." Caldwell blinked. "Tex, what are you—" "No time to explain. I need those cans 100 feet of wire and clearance for immediate takeoff. And Pete," Harlan turned to face him directly, "when you tell command what I'm about to do, maybe wait until after I'm airborne. Easier to get forgiveness than permission." What happened in the next 47 minutes would become one of the most unorthodox tactical innovations in the history of night fighting. A Texas farm boy with a high school education and a gift for mechanical improvisation was about to defeat German technology and training using materials that wouldn't have looked out of place in a repair shop. 23 Lancaster bombers, each carrying 7 men, were limping home damaged and vulnerable. German ace pilots flying the most advanced night fighters in the world were positioning for massacre, and standing between them was 1 American pilot, 1 British Mosquito fighter, and 6 empty oil cans. The Germans called what was about to happen impossible. The RAF would later classify it as inadvisable but effective. The bomber crews whose lives were saved would simply call it bloody brilliant. But it all started with Tex Harlan staring at garbage and seeing possibility. James Robert Harlan had been born in Amarillo, Texas, in 1918, the 3rd son of a cattle rancher who went broke in the Depression. While his older brothers drifted to cities looking for work, young Tex stayed on the failing ranch, learning to keep broken equipment running with baling wire, ingenuity, and a mechanical aptitude that bordered on wizardry. His formal education ended at 16 when money ran out, but his practical education was just beginning. He could rebuild a tractor engine using parts from 3 different models. He could fix a water pump with materials from a hardware store. Most importantly, he learned that any problem had a solution if you were willing to think sideways and work with what you had rather than what you wished you had. When war came, Harlan volunteered for the Army Air Forces, lying about his age to enlist in 1941 at 22. His mechanical skills got him assigned to aircraft maintenance, where he distinguished himself by keeping P-40 Warhawks flying when parts were scarce and time was critical. His transition to pilot training came through an unusual route. In June 1942 at Selfridge Field, Michigan, a P-40 developed engine trouble during takeoff with a student pilot at the controls. The engine quit at 200 feet with insufficient altitude to bail out and insufficient runway to land straight ahead. The student froze. Harlan, who was in the back seat as a maintenance observer, took control. With no power and no altitude, he side-slipped the fighter, killed enough speed to avoid overshooting, and planted it in a wheat field adjacent to the runway with damage limited to bent landing gear. The pilot walked away shaken but alive. The base commander, Colonel Thomas McKinnon, called Harlan into his office the next day. "Sergeant, That was some of the finest emergency flying I've ever witnessed. Where'd you learn to fly? Harlan shifted uncomfortably. Taught myself, sir. Had a crop duster back home. Couldn't afford lessons, so I read the manual and practiced until I stopped crashing. McKinnon stared at him. You taught yourself to fly a crop duster by reading the manual? Yes, sir. Well, I crashed it twice before I figured out the rudder coordination, but after that, it got easier. Sergeant Harlan, how would you like to become a fighter pilot? Sir, I don't have the education requirements. Didn't finish high school. The Army needs pilots more than it needs high school diplomas. You've got natural ability and mechanical understanding. I'm recommending you for flight training. Don't make me regret it. Harlan completed flight training at Moorefield, Texas in December 1942, earning his wings and commission as a second lieutenant. His instructors noted exceptional aircraft handling and unorthodox but effective problem-solving in his evaluation. What they really meant was that Harlan flew by feel and instinct rather than by the book, and somehow it worked. His assignment to night fighters came through another unconventional path. During advanced training in P-38 Lightnings, Harlan demonstrated an unusual ability to fly by instruments in conditions that grounded other pilots. When asked how he maintained such precise control in zero visibility, he shrugged. Flying at night over Texas Panhandle during dust storms, you learned to trust your instruments or you died. Same principle, different altitude. The Army Air Forces was desperately trying to develop effective night fighting capabilities to counter German bombers and support RAF operations. American pilots with instrument flying skills were rare and valuable. In March 1943, Harlan was sent to England and assigned to the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron, one of the first American units dedicated to nocturnal combat. The squadron flew British-built de Havilland Mosquitoes, twin-engine fighters that combined speed, range, and the ability to carry airborne interception radar. The Mosquito was perfect for night fighting, fast enough to catch German bombers, maneuverable enough to dogfight, and equipped with technology that gave it an edge in darkness. Harlan loved it immediately. The Mosquito flew like a dream, responsive and forgiving. Its wooden construction gave it a unique feel, slightly different from metal aircraft but no less capable. And the radar, the AI Mark 8 airborne interception system, opened up the night sky in ways that seemed almost magical. But Harlan being Harlan, he didn't just learn to fly the Mosquito and operate its systems. He studied how everything worked, pestered the radar technicians with questions, spent off-duty hours in the maintenance hangars understanding every component. He wanted to know not just what each system did, but how it did it and what might go wrong. This obsessive mechanical curiosity would prove decisive on the night of March 17, 1944. The mission that night was supposed to be routine by the grim standards of strategic bombing. RAF Bomber Command was sending 347 Lancasters and Halifaxes to Hamburg, targeting the submarine construction yards that were supplying U-boats to the Atlantic wolf packs. It was the third major raid on Hamburg in 2 weeks, and the Germans knew it was coming. The Luftwaffe's night fighter force, though battered by losses and fuel shortages, was still dangerous. They had developed sophisticated tactics, ground-controlled interception using radar networks across occupied Europe, freelance intruder missions along known bomber routes, and the deadly upward-firing cannon installation called Schrägemusik that allowed fighters to attack from below where bomber gunners couldn't see them. The 422nd Night Fighter Squadron's role was to provide fighter cover for the bomber stream, patrolling ahead of the formation to disrupt German night fighters before they could position for attacks. It was dangerous work requiring precise navigation, effective use of radar, and the ability to fight in total darkness. Harlan was scheduled for the early patrol, taking off at 2100 hours to sweep the route ahead of the bomber stream. His radar operator was Flight Sergeant William Billy Kowalski from Pittsburgh, a former electronics technician who understood the AI Mark 8 radar better than most officers understood their own jobs. They took off into a clear night with good visibility, unusual for March over England. The bomber stream would launch an hour behind them, giving Harlan time to reach the patrol zone and begin hunting for German fighters. The flight to the patrol area was uneventful. Harlan flew at 12,000 feet, high enough to have altitude advantage, but low enough to avoid the worst of the cold. Kowalski worked the radar, scanning the sky ahead for contacts. At 22:15 hours, they reached their assigned patrol zone over the North Sea, 40 miles off the Dutch coast. Below them, scattered clouds reflected moonlight. Above, stars filled the sky with enough illumination that Harlan could see the horizon. These were good conditions for night fighting, enough light to maintain visual contact once radar brought you close to a target. "Contact!" Kowalski called over the intercom, bearing 350, range 6 miles, altitude 14,000, single aircraft, heading southeast. Harlan turned toward the contact and increased power. The Mosquito accelerated smoothly, its twin Merlin engines responding with mechanical precision. "Talk to me, Billy. What's he doing?" "Steady course, constant altitude. He's not maneuvering, could be a bomber heading home or a night fighter taking up position. Let's find out." They closed to 3 miles, then 2. At 1 mile, Harlan eased back on the throttles and began a careful approach from below and behind, positioning in the target's blind spot. At half a mile, he could see it visually, a twin-engine aircraft silhouetted against the stars. "Junkers 88, Harlan transmitted. "Confirm." "Confirmed?" Kowalski replied. "That's a Jerry." The Junkers Ju-88 was Germany's most versatile combat aircraft, serving as bomber, night fighter, reconnaissance platform, and more. This one carried the characteristic radar antennas of a night fighter variant, making it both predator and threat. Harlan maneuvered to within 400 yards, centered the gun sight on the enemy aircraft's fuselage, and pressed the firing button. 4 20mm cannons and 4 303 caliber machine guns erupted simultaneously. The Mosquito shuddered from recoil as tracers reached out toward the German fighter. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Cannon shells walked across the Ju-88's wing root and fuselage. Something exploded inside the aircraft, probably fuel tanks or ammunition. Flames spread across the left wing. The German fighter rolled left and began its death dive toward the North Sea 9,000 feet below. "Splash 1, Kowalski reported with satisfaction. "Good shooting, Tex." But there was no time to celebrate. The radar screen showed multiple new contacts appearing from the east. German night fighters were launching from bases in Holland, moving to intercept the approaching bomber stream. Over the next hour, Harlan and Kowalski engaged 3 more German aircraft. They damaged a Messerschmitt Bf 110, forcing it to break off and head for home. They drove away a Ju-88 that was stalking a crippled Lancaster, limping back from the target. They provided radar warning to other Allied fighters, coordinating a defensive net that broke up several German attack attempts. But at 2300 hours, everything went wrong simultaneously. The bomber stream, having hit Hamburg and turned for home, was approaching the Dutch coast when German controllers sprang their trap. They had held back a strong force of night fighters, allowing the bombers to penetrate deeply before committing their interceptors. Now, with Allied fighters low on fuel and ammunition, the Germans struck with coordinated waves. Harlan's radio exploded with distress calls. "Night fighter at 6 o'clock. We're hit going down. Emergency, emergency, losing altitude." Harlan turned toward the bomber stream, but his fuel gauges told a brutal story. He had perhaps 20 minutes of fuel remaining, barely enough to make it back to England. His ammunition counter showed 100 rounds left, enough for 1 or 2 bursts. He was effectively out of the fight. "Billy, get a count on bombers in trouble." Kowalski worked his radar, correlating contacts with radio calls. At least 20, maybe more. They're scattered across 50 miles, all heading for the coast. Jerry's hitting them hard. The tactical picture was clear and grim. German night fighters were conducting a coordinated massacre. They had positioned themselves along the bombers' return route, waiting for damaged aircraft that couldn't maintain formation. These stragglers, many with wounded crew and damaged systems, were easy prey for experienced German pilots. Allied night fighters had done their best, but there simply weren't enough of them. Most had already expended ammunition and fuel fighting the first wave of German interceptors. The bombers were on their own. Harlan felt the frustration like a physical pain. Below him, men were dying. 23 Lancaster bombers. He could see them now on radar, and some visually as they passed through moonlit patches, each one vulnerable, each one trying desperately to reach England, and he couldn't do anything to help them. That's when he noticed the oil can. It was wedged behind his seat, left there by a maintenance crew member who had been checking hydraulic lines earlier that day. A standard quart oil can, empty, battered, forgotten. In the dim light of the cockpit, illuminated by the red glow of instrument panels, it seemed to capture and reflect light in a way that caught Harlan's attention. And in that moment, with 23 bombers about to be slaughtered and his aircraft out of ammunition, Tex Harlan had an idea so audacious, so technically questionable, so brilliantly improvised that it would either save everyone or get him court-martialed. Probably both. "Billy," he said slowly, "how many empty oil cans do we have in the maintenance sheds at Wittering?" "What? Tex, what are you—" "Just answer. How many empty oil cans?" "I don't know. Dozens, probably. Why?" "Because I need 6 of them. And I need to land, get them installed on our aircraft, and get back up here in 40 minutes. Can you plot a course back to Wittering that saves 5 minutes on our flight time?" "Tex, what the hell are you talking about? Install oil cans on the aircraft? For what?" Harlan was already turning the Mosquito toward England, pushing the throttles forward to maximum cruise power. "I'm going to use them to save those bombers. Trust me. That's not much of an explanation." "It's all I've got time for. Plot the course." They landed at RAF Wittering at 23:20 hours. Harlan taxied directly to the dispersal area where maintenance crews worked on aircraft throughout the night. He shut down engines while the Mosquito was still rolling, popped the canopy, and jumped down before the propellers had stopped spinning. Flight Lieutenant Caldwell came running from the operations hut. "Tex, what are you doing? You're supposed to be on patrol." "I need 6 empty oil cans, 100 feet of steel wire, a drill, and your best crew chief. I need them in 20 minutes. "What? Why?" "To save 23 bombers that are about to get torn apart by German night fighters. Are you going to help me, or are you going to ask questions until everyone's dead?" Something in Harlan's expression, the absolute certainty mixed with barely controlled desperation, convinced Caldwell. He turned to the senior maintenance officer, Squadron Leader James Thornton. "Get him what he needs. Don't ask why. Just do it." Thornton, a pragmatic Scotsman who had seen enough of war to know when to follow instinct, nodded. "Empty oil cans?" "6 of them, and wire." "Right then. Follow me, Captain." 10 minutes later, Harlan was standing next to his Mosquito, explaining the modification to a crew chief named Technical Sergeant Robert Mackenzie, who was staring at him with an expression that suggested Harlan had indeed lost his mind. "You want me to drill holes in the oil cans, attach wire, and mount them where exactly?" "Under the wings, 3 on each side, spaced evenly. The wire attaches to the can and runs back to a release mechanism in the cockpit. When I pull the release, the cans detach and fall. And this does what exactly? Creates a radar signature that looks like falling aircraft. The German night fighters have airborne radar. When they see 6 contacts falling toward the ocean, they'll think they're bombers going down. They'll break off their attacks and go investigate." Mackenzie absorbed this for a long moment. "That's either brilliant or completely insane." "Probably both. Can you do it in 20 minutes? Can't promise they'll stay attached during high-speed maneuvering. They only need to stay attached until I release them. After that, falling off is the entire point. Mackenzie grinned suddenly. Right then, I'll need some help. What followed was controlled chaos. 6 maintenance crew members descended on the Mosquito with tools, wire, and a determination to make something impossible happen on a deadline. They drilled holes in the oil cans near the top for wire attachment. They fabricated simple release mechanisms using cable and spring clips. They mounted the cans under the wings using improvised brackets welded from scrap metal. At 23:52 hours, just 32 minutes after landing, the Mosquito was ready. 6 oil cans hung under the wings like strange ordnance. Wire ran from each can through small holes drilled in the wing's surface, connecting to release handles Mackenzie had installed in the cockpit. It looked absurd, like something from a cartoon rather than a combat aircraft. Caldwell stared at the modification with professional horror. "Tex, this is completely unauthorized. Those cans could tear off during takeoff, damage the aircraft, kill you both. Or they could save 23 bomber crews. Pete, I don't have time to request permission through channels. Those men are dying right now." Caldwell looked at the cans, then at Harlan, then at his watch. Finally, he made a decision that would either earn him a medal or a court-martial. "Get airborne. I'll inform Group Captain that you've returned to patrol with, modified external stores. I'll save the details for after you land." Harlan and Kowalski strapped in. The engines started with their characteristic smooth rumble. The Mosquito taxied to the runway, the oil can swaying slightly beneath the wings but staying attached. "Billy," Harlan said as they lined up for takeoff, "if those cans come off during the takeoff roll, we might lose control. If that happens, I'll probably shut it down and abort. Probably. I'm making this up as I go. Hang on." Harlan pushed the throttles forward. The Mosquito accelerated down the runway, the additional drag from the oil cans barely noticeable. At 90 miles per hour, Harlan rotated. The aircraft lifted smoothly. The cans stayed attached. They climbed into the night sky, heading east toward the bombers that were now scattered along the Dutch coast, each one a target for German night fighters that were methodically hunting them down. Harlan checked his watch. 12 minutes had elapsed since he first landed. The bombers would be approaching the coast, trying to reach the relative safety of open water where German fighters were less likely to follow. But 12 minutes was an eternity in aerial combat. How many had already been shot down? "Billy, get tactical picture. Where are bombers and Jerry fighters?" Kowalski worked radar. 17 bomber contacts over 40 miles. Multiple German fighters around them. Some bombers in serious trouble. Nearest German fighter? 15 miles, bearing 070, between 3 bombers and coast. That's where we start. 5 minutes later, they closed on engagement. 3 Lancasters, 1 German fighter positioning for attack. "Billy, can the Germans' radar see us?" "Probably. We're within detection range." "Good. I want him to see us." Harlan maneuvered between German fighter and bombers, descended to 7,000 feet, and reached for first release handle. Starting release in 3, 2, 1 now. First oil can detached and fell. 3 seconds. Second can. 3 seconds. Third can. "Billy, what's radar showing?" Kowalski stared at his scope. "It's working." Jerry's radar seeing the cans as 3 separate contacts falling. He's turning away from bombers, diving to follow falling contacts. The German fighter rolled into steep dive, chasing what his radar showed as 3 bombers falling toward ocean. By the time he realized he was chasing oil cans, he'd be too low and too confused to re-engage. The 3 Lancasters continued westward. Their crews would never know 3 empty oil cans saved their lives. "Next contact, Billy." Over the next 26 minutes, Harlan and Kowalski played deadly deception across the North Sea. They positioned near threatened bombers, released oil cans at precise intervals, watched German night fighters break off attacks. Second engagement involved 2 German fighters bracketing a damaged Lancaster. Harlan released 2 cans quickly. 1 German followed the cans. Harlan then flew directly at the remaining fighter with all lights on. The German pilot, confronted by apparent suicidal attack, broke hard right and dove away. Third engagement, 4 bombers clustered for defense. Harlan released his last can above the formation, followed it down. From German's perspective, looked like he'd scored a hit. German pilot turned away. The bombers flew on. By 0035 hours on March 18th, surviving bombers crossed English coast. German fighters, low on fuel and confused by reports of aircraft falling without wreckage, returned to bases. Harlan turned for Wittering, exhausted. At 01:15, he landed. Waiting were Caldwell, Thornton, and Group Captain Mason. Harlan climbed out. Mason spoke first. "Captain Harlan, Bomber Command reports 23 Lancasters being stalked by German fighters made it home safely. Crews report German fighters broke off attacks for no apparent reason. Care to explain?" Harlan described the oil can deception. When he finished, silence. Mason said, "So you attached oil cans to a combat aircraft, took off without authorization, and faked aircraft crashes to deceive German night fighters?" "Yes, sir." "And it worked?" "Yes, sir." Mason looked at Thornton. "Squadron leader, explain how this was mechanically possible." Thornton answered, "The cans fell at approximately 120 miles per hour. That speed, combined with tumbling, created variable radar returns. To German radar operators, they looked like aircraft falling after being hit. And German pilots followed them down." "Yes, sir. By the time they realized they were chasing debris, our bombers had escaped." Mason turned back. "Captain, what you did was dangerous, unauthorized, and completely against regulations." "Yes, sir." "It also saved 161 men and 23 Lancasters worth £6 million. Group Captain Harris at Bomber Command asked me to convey his personal thanks." Mason continued, "Can this technique be replicated?" Harlan considered. "Sir, it works because it's unexpected. Once Germans figure it out, they'll adjust, maybe 3 or 4 more times before it becomes ineffective. Then we'll use it 3 or 4 more times. Squadron leader, develop standardized oil can modification kit. Captain, you'll train other pilots." "Yes, sir." Mason started to leave, turned back. "One more thing, Captain. If you ever modify a combat aircraft without proper authorization again, I'll have you flying a desk for the rest of the war. Understood?" "Perfectly, sir." The oil can trick was used 7 more times over the next 6 weeks. Each time, Mosquitoes carrying empty oil cans positioned near threatened bombers and released them at precise intervals, creating radar signatures that German night fighters interpreted as falling aircraft. The technique worked by exploiting German airborne radar limitations, tactical doctrine emphasizing kill confirmation, and human psychology. After 7 uses, German intelligence intercepted radio communications about oil can releases and deduced the deception. By May 1944, the trick was obsolete. But in its brief life, it saved an estimated 73 bombers and 511 crew members through creative improvisation rather than superior technology. Harlan flew 37 more missions, scoring 6 confirmed victories. He received the Distinguished Flying Cross for the oil can trick and Silver Star for Normandy invasion actions. After the war, he returned to Texas, married, raised 4 children, ran a crop dusting business for 40 years. In his workshop hung a battered oil can with plaque, "Sometimes the best weapons are the ones you improvise." In 1978, Harlan spoke at the RAF Museum in Hendon. Among the audience were 3 former Lancaster pilots saved by the oil can trick on March 17th. They had spent 34 years not knowing who saved them. Squadron leader Ernest Pemberton approached him after. "Captain Harlan, I flew Lancaster Baker 2-3 that night. 6,000 feet, engine shot out, German fighter closing. My crew was preparing to bail out. Then the Jerry just dove away. Was that you?" Harlan checked his flight log. "Baker 2-3. Yes, sir. First one. 2 oil cans released at 0007. The German followed them down, thinking you'd been hit. Pemberton's eyes filled with tears. You saved 7 men with empty oil cans. Actually saved 161 men that night with 6 empty oil cans. Yours were just the first. How did you think of such a thing? Harlan smiled. Grew up poor in Texas during Depression. You learn to solve problems with what you've got, not what you wish you had. If this story of incredible improvisation and creative problem-solving has inspired you, please smash that like button and share this video. And if you haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button and notification bell. We bring you these deep dives into World War II's most fascinating untold stories every week. Now let's look at the lasting impact of the oil can trick. Dr. Richard Halloran's 1992 study, Innovation in Air Warfare, concluded the oil can trick demonstrated 3 critical factors for tactical innovation. First, deep understanding of both your capabilities and enemy limitations. Second, willingness to think unconventionally. Third, courage to implement unproven ideas under combat pressure. The oil can trick highlighted American versus German approaches. Germans had superior technology, advanced radar, better night fighters, highly trained pilots, but they operated within rigid doctrinal frameworks. Americans compensated through flexibility, improvisation, willingness to try unconventional approaches. This pattern repeated throughout the war, where American creativity defeated German technological advantage. When Harlan died in 2003 at age 84, 17 men flew across continents to attend his funeral. 3 were British veterans whose bombers he saved. 4 were former Mosquito pilots he trained. 10 were descendants of the 161 men whose lives he saved. They honored a man who demonstrated the best weapon isn't the most sophisticated, but the most creatively applied. His grandson, Air Force Colonel James Harlan III, spoke at the service. My grandfather never thought of himself as special. He was a farm boy who learned to fix things with whatever was at hand. Those 6 empty oil cans weren't brilliant innovation to him. They were just using what was available to solve the problem. That's who he was. Squadron leader Pemberton, who died in 2005, wrote in his memoir, Bomber Pilot's War, "We were dead men in a crippled aircraft. Then the German fighter turned away and dove. For 34 years I believed we were lucky. Then I met Tex Harlan and learned the truth. We were saved by a man who looked at empty oil cans and saw possibility. People ask what won the war. I tell them it was won by people like Tex Harlan who faced impossible problems and refused to accept they were impossible. 6 empty oil cans saved 161 men. That's American ingenuity at its finest. One man deciding conventional solutions weren't good enough and inventing something better on the spot. The Germans had better equipment and training. We had men like Tex Harlan who looked at garbage and saw weapons. That made all the difference. The Mosquito Harlan flew that night, serial number KB368, was scrapped in 1953. But maintenance crews removed a section of wing panel where oil can attachment points had been welded. That panel now hangs in the Imperial War Museum in London, proof that sometimes the most significant innovations come from practical people facing immediate problems with limited resources and unlimited creativity. 6 empty oil cans, wire, and 1 pilot with imagination defeated German night fighters, sophisticated radar, and tactical experience. The oil cans won not because they were better technology, but because one man understood how to use them effectively. That's the real lesson. Victory doesn't always go to the side with better weapons. Sometimes it goes to the side with better ideas. The oil can trick wasn't brilliant because it was complex. It was brilliant because it was simple, direct, perfectly matched to the problem. German night fighters relied on radar. Falling debris created radar signatures. German pilots followed falling signatures. Therefore, create falling signatures, and German pilots would follow them instead of attacking bombers. Logic, observation, implementation. 3 steps from problem to solution. No months of development, no testing, no approvals. Just one man with mechanical understanding and courage to try something unprecedented. The 23 bombers, saved on March 17th, carried 161 crew members who returned to England, eventually went home, had children and grandchildren. By 2024, those 161 men have thousands of descendants who exist because on one night in March 1944, a Texas farm boy attached garbage to a combat aircraft and used it to deceive the Luftwaffe. That's the ultimate legacy of improvisation. Not just immediate tactical success, but cascading effects through generations. Every creative solution that saves lives echoes forward through time. The oil can trick showed that the impossible was merely difficult, that limitations were challenges to overcome, and that human imagination could triumph over technological disadvantage when properly applied. Tex Harlan embodied that truth. A man who finished school at 16 taught himself to fly from a manual and saved 161 lives with 6 empty oil cans. His story reminds us that genius isn't always found in laboratories. Sometimes it's found in people who learn to solve problems by necessity, who understand that the best tool is the one you have, not the one you wish you had. 6 oil cans, 23 bombers, 161 lives, one night. One man who refused to accept that having no ammunition meant having no options. That's the oil can trick. That's American innovation. That's how you win wars when the other side has better equipment. You think differently, you act boldly, and you use whatever you have to save whoever you can. And sometimes what you have is empty oil cans, and sometimes that's exactly enough.